The officer sneered, deliberately tipping the steaming mug of black coffee onto the elderly man's tweed coat. His son, a bald man with eyes like frozen steel, watched the dark stain spread. The cop, Rex Miller, just smirked at the silent, powerful figure. "What's your boy gonna do?" he taunted. But then, the man stood up. "Before I tell you exactly what happened to that cop in the next 5 minutes, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Now, let's get into it." The place was called the Iron Skillet Diner, just off a forgotten highway exit. The air in the Iron Skillet Diner was thick with the comforting scent of life, a rich blend of sizzling bacon grease, sweet fried onions, and the faint, worn smell of old vinyl from the booth seats. A low, gravelly blues tune drifted from an ancient jukebox in the corner, weaving through the quiet murmur of conversations and the rhythmic clatter of forks against thick ceramic plates. It was a place frozen in time, a sanctuary for truckers, locals, and anyone seeking a moment of peace. By the window, sunlight streamed in, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Arthur, an old man with kind eyes and a tweed flat cap perched on his white hair, sat opposite his son. His hands, marked by the fine tremors of age, carefully navigated a glass of water to his lips. He wore a heavy wool coat, even indoors, a silent testament to a body that no longer held the heat it once did. Despite his fragility, there was an unbreakable dignity in his posture. Across from him sat Jason. He was a man built of quiet intensity. His bald head reflected the overhead lights, and his dark, fitted sweater did little to hide the powerful physique beneath. He didn't speak much, his presence alone a shield around his father. To anyone else, they were just a father and son sharing a quiet breakfast. No one knew this silent guardian was Jason Statham. The diner's peaceful rhythm was shattered when the door swung open with a violent jingle. Officer Rex Miller strutted in. He wasn't walking. He was claiming territory. His uniform was stretched tight over a soft midsection, his badge worn more like a medal of conquest than a symbol of service. His eyes swept the room with an air of predatory boredom, a man who measured his own worth by the discomfort of others. The waitress, a cheerful woman named Brenda, saw him and her smile faltered. The cook peered through the service window, his expression hardening. Miller was a known poison in this community. He bypassed the line at the counter, barking his order for black coffee, now over the shoulder of another customer. His gaze then landed on Arthur. He saw the shaking hands, the gentle demeanor, the vulnerability, and like a wolf singling out the weakest of the flock, he saw an opportunity. He snatched his steaming mug from the counter and swaggered toward their table, his boots thudding heavily on the linoleum floor. He loomed over them, casting a shadow that eclipsed the morning sun. "What's your problem, old man?" Miller sneered, his voice a low, grating sound. Arthur blinked, startled. I beg your pardon." The staring, the shaking. Miller gestured with the mug, hot coffee sloshing dangerously close to the rim, making everyone nervous. "You got a problem you need to share?" Jason's hand, which had been resting on the table, slowly curled into a fist. He didn't look up, but his entire body went rigid. "No, officer," Arthur said, his voice polite but strained. "I was just enjoying the morning." "Enjoying the morning?" Miller laughed, a humorless, ugly sound. "You look like you're about to fall apart. People are trying to eat here." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was loud enough for the whole diner to hear. "Maybe you need something to wake you up." And then it happened. With a deliberate, almost theatrical slowness, Miller tilted his wrist. The scalding black liquid poured from the mug in a dark, steaming torrent, directly onto the front of Arthur's wool coat. It soaked the thick fabric instantly, steam rising as Arthur cried out, a sharp gasp of shock and pain. The heat seared through the layers, and the old man flinched violently, clutching at his chest as the stain spread like a black wound. Humiliation, more painful than the burn, flushed his face pale. The diner fell into a collective, stunned silence. A fork dropped with a loud clang. Brenda covered her mouth with her hand. Miller set the empty mug down on the table with a smug clink. "Oops," he said, his lips twisting into a cruel smile. Guess your hands aren't the only clumsy ones around here. Arthur trembled, his eyes welling up not just from the searing pain, but from the brutal sting of being treated as less than human. He turned his head slowly, his lips quivering as he whispered one word, a plea and a statement all in one. Jason. Miller's smirk widened. Yeah? What's your boy gonna do about it? Just sit there and watch his daddy get put in his place. The air thickened, growing heavy and cold. Every breath in the room seemed to be held in suspense. Then came a sound, a low, ominous creak of wood and metal as Jason Statham slowly pushed his chair back and rose to his full height. He didn't seem to just stand. He seemed to expand, filling the space, his shadow swallowing Officer Miller whole. The room felt smaller, the air thinner. His eyes, which had been downcast, now lifted. They were no longer the calm, watchful eyes of a son. They were frozen chips of slate, burning with a cold control fire. His jaw was set like granite. Officer Miller's smirk finally wavered. He hadn't just spilled coffee on a frail old man. He had just lit a fuse on a bomb, and he was standing right at the blast site. In the deafening silence of the Iron Skillet Diner, he was about to learn the true meaning of consequences. Jason's voice cut through the silence, low, level, and laced with deadly promise. You just poured scalding coffee on my father. The statement hung in the air, not as a question, but as a verdict. Every patron in the Iron Skillet Diner became a jury, their eyes locked on the unfolding drama. Officer Miller, for the first time, seemed to recognize the sheer physical disadvantage he was at. Jason wasn't just tall. He was a monolith of contained force, his presence pressing down on the officer like a change in atmospheric pressure. Still, arrogance was a hard habit to break. Miller puffed out his chest, his hand instinctively dropping to rest near the butt of his sidearm. So what if I did? He blustered, trying to reclaim his dominance. He was making a scene. I'm the law here, pal. You and your old man should learn some respect. Respect, Jason repeated, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. He took a single, deliberate step forward. The floorboards barely creaked. You going to teach me about respect? His voice remained unervingly calm, a stark contrast to the storm brewing in his eyes. Gasps rippled through the diner. A trucker in a nearby booth slowly, almost imperceptibly, started recording on his phone. Brenda, the waitress, backed away toward the kitchen, her hand hovering over the wall-mounted telephone. I could arrest you for interfering with an officer, Miller threatened, his voice a little too loud, a little too shaky. So I suggest you sit back down, tough guy, before you make a mistake you can't walk away from. This badge, he tapped it with a fat finger, means I could do whatever I want. That badge doesn't make you untouchable, Jason corrected him, his voice dropping even lower, forcing Miller to lean in slightly to hear. It makes you accountable. The word accountable was the final spark. Miller's face contorted in rage. His professionalism, already a thin veneer, evaporated completely. He abandoned threats and swung, a wild, sloppy right hook aimed at Jason's jaw. It was a bully's punch, fueled by ego and propelled by the belief that his uniform made him invincible. To the onlookers, the motion seemed almost comically slow. Jason didn't dodge or flinch. He moved with a startling, brutal economy. His left hand shot up, not to block but to intercept. He caught Miller's fist midair, his fingers wrapping around the officer's knuckles like a vice. Miller's eyes widened in shock and pain. Before he could even process what had happened, Jason twisted. A sickening pop echoed through the silent diner. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp, visceral, the sound of bone and cartilage giving way. Miller screamed, a high-pitched yelp that was utterly at odds with his bravado. With the same fluid motion, Jason yanked the officer forward, off balance, and used his momentum to slam him chest first into the edge of their table. Plates and silverware rattled violently. A glass of water toppled, its contents mixing with the spilled coffee on the floor. Let's talk about accountability, Jason said, his voice a low growl right next to Miller's ear. He pinned the officer's arm behind his back, applying pressure to the elbow joint. Miller groaned, his face pressed into the sticky tabletop. Every bit of pain you caused him, Every drop of dignity you try to strip away, I'm gonna give it all back to you. With interest, Miller thrashed, trying to break free, but Jason's grip was like forged steel. With a powerful, calculated sweep of his leg, he kicked Miller's feet out from under him. The officer crashed to the floor, landing hard on his back. His tarnished badge skidded across the checkered linoleum tiles, coming to a stop near Arthur's feet. Arthur gasped, covering his mouth. "Jason, that's enough." Jason turned his head just enough to meet his father's gaze, and for a fleeting moment, the cold fury in his eyes softened. "It's all right, Dad. He's just learning a lesson." He turned his attention back to the groaning man on the floor. But Miller wasn't done. Humiliation had curdled into pure rage. Roaring, he scrambled to his feet, his eyes wild. "You think this is over?" he shrieked. He lunged for a nearby wooden chair, hoisting it up and swinging it wildly toward Jason's head. The diner patrons cried out in alarm. But Jason was already in motion. He met the chair mid-swing, one hand catching the backrest, the other the leg. With a wrenching twist, he ripped it from Miller's grasp as if it were a child's toy and tossed it aside. Before Miller could react, Jason's elbow drove into his ribs. A distinct, ugly crack resounded through the room. The officer stumbled back, the air exploding from his lungs in a wheezing gasp. Jason advanced, relentless, backing the wounded officer toward the wall. "You humiliated a senior citizen," he stated, his voice cold and clear. "My father, in front of all these people, for your own sick amusement." He took another step, and Miller flattened himself against the wall, terror finally replacing the anger in his eyes. "Now you're gonna feel what real humiliation is." He seized Miller by the collar of his uniform, the fabric straining, and shoved him hard against the wall. The impact rattled the cheap framed pictures of local landmarks hanging there. Miller's head snapped back, his swagger now completely gone, replaced by the frantic, desperate look of cornered prey. All right, I get it. Stop." Miller wheezed, his broken ribs sending waves of agony through his body. "No," Jason said, his face inches from the officer's. "You don't get it yet, but you will." He leaned in, his voice ablade. "Apologize." To him, he nodded toward his father, and to everyone in this room whose morning you ruined. Now, the diner was tomb silent. Everyone leaned in, waiting. Miller's pride warred with his pain and fear. His jaw trembled. Jason increased the pressure against his throat slightly. Finally, the words tore from his lips, ragged and choked. I'm sorry. I can't hear you," Jason growled. The cop's voice cracked, but he shouted it, his voice echoing in the stunned silence. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have touched him." A murmur of satisfaction went through the crowd. It seemed, for a moment, that the lesson was over. But Officer Rex Miller, broken and bleeding, had one last, desperate act of defiance left in him. And Jason was waiting for it. The apology hung in the air, thin and unconvincing. Officer Miller was on the floor, propped up against the wall like a discarded doll, his face a mask of sweat, shame, and crimson. The diners watched, a silent, captivated audience, their phones held up like candles at a vigil, recording every humiliating second. Arthur, his father, had composed himself, dabbing at his stained coat with a napkin, his expression a mixture of shock and a quiet, steely pride in his son. Jason stood over Miller, a sentinel, his posture calm but coiled, a predator daring its prey to make one more foolish move. For a long, tense moment, the only sounds were Miller's ragged breathing and the distant sizzle from the kitchen grill. The crisis seemed to have passed its peak. The bully had been beaten, the apology extracted. Brenda, the waitress, finally reached the phone on the wall, her trembling fingers preparing to dial for backup, or perhaps an ambulance. But for a man like Rex Miller, public humiliation was a fate worse than any physical beating. His world was built on a foundation of intimidation and unearned authority. To have it all stripped away by a silent man in a sweater was an annihilation of his very being. Blinded by a desperate, suicidal rage, he made his final move. With a guttural roar, he staggered to his feet, swaying. His eyes, burning with a venomous hatred, locked onto Arthur. He ignored Jason completely, his mind fixated on the original source of his wounded pride. In a clumsy, lunging motion, his hand shot out and snatched the heavy, industrial-grade metal coffee pot from its heating element on the counter. Steam still billowed from its spout. It was nearly full. "You think you can humiliate me in front of them?" he shrieked, his voice cracking with fury. "I'll finish what I started. I'll scald that smug look right off your old man's face." A collective scream ripped through the diner. Brenda dropped the phone. The trucker yelled, "Hey, put that down." Miller lunged, not at Jason, but toward the table, swinging the heavy pot of boiling coffee like a medieval mace, aimed directly at Arthur's head. But he had forgotten who he was dealing with. He had forgotten the speed, the precision, the lethal grace. Jason moved. It wasn't a step. It was a blur. He closed the distance in a fraction of a second. His hand shot out, not to block the pot, but to intercept the arm that wielded it. He caught Miller's wrist mid-swing, his fingers digging into nerve and tendon. The trajectory of the pot jerked violently sideways. Scalding coffee erupted from the spout, splashing harmlessly across the linoleum floor with a loud hiss. With a sharp, brutal twist of his wrist and a downward pull, Jason didn't just disarm Miller. He turned the officer's own weapon against the environment. He wrenched the pot free and, in one continuous, devastating motion, smashed it against the edge of the granite countertop. The metal pot imploded with a deafening crash, shattering into a twisted wreck of steaming shards and spewing the remaining coffee everywhere. The diner went dead silent again. If what came before was a lesson, what came now was a demolition. "You were warned," Jason bit out, the words like chips of ice. There was no pause, no hesitation. His hands moved with the terrifying precision of a surgeon and the force of a jackhammer. A short, sharp jab to Miller's already cracked ribs made the officer double over. As he gasped for air, Jason's other hand came up in a brutal open palm strike to the jaw, snapping Miller's head back. He followed it with a knee to the solar plexus that lifted the heavier man off his feet. Miller stumbled backward, dazed, his movements uncoordinated, like a puppet with its strings cut. A final, powerful sweep of Jason's leg kicked the officer's feet from under him again. This time, he crashed backward, not onto the open floor, but into an empty booth. The wooden table, not built for such an impact, splintered and collapsed under his weight with a sound like a tree falling. Plates, salt shakers, and sugar dispensers exploded in a shower of debris. "My God," someone whispered from the corner. "He's taking him apart." Jason advanced. Towering over the broken man sprawled in the wreckage of the booth. He wasn't finished. This wasn't just about winning a fight. It was about eradicating a threat. He seized Miller by his ruined collar, hauling him effortlessly from the debris, and slammed him against the wall one last time. Miller's head thudded sickeningly against the plaster, and the picture frame next to him finally fell, its glass shattering on the floor. "You tried to burn my father," Jason growled, his face inches from Miller's, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that seemed to shake the very walls. "You thought humiliating the weak made you strong." He tightened his grip, forcing the dazed officer to look him in the eye. But power doesn't come from hurting the helpless. It comes from protecting them. A lesson you will never forget. Miller whimpered, the fight completely gone from him, his body a broken mess. His words were a pathetic, gurgling plea. "Please, please, no more." Jason's hand shot out, gripping the man's jaw, forcing him to face the silent, watching crowd. "Say it again, loud, so everyone here knows you are nothing but a coward." Tears, hot and shameful, cut clean tracks through the grime and sweat on Officer Miller's face. His entire body trembled, not from rage, but from the utter, soul-crushing finality of his defeat. He was broken, physically and spiritually, pinned against the wall by a man who was judge, jury, and executioner all in one. The badge on his chest was just a piece of cheap, tarnished metal, a mockery of the authority he had so grotesquely abused. "I ask you a question." Jason's voice was dangerously quiet now, a whisper that carried more menace than any shout. Miller's gaze flickered wildly across the faces in the crowd. He saw no sympathy, only a cold, hard judgment reflecting his own cruelty back at him. He saw the phone cameras still pointed at him, immortalizing his disgrace. There was no escape. His will finally shattered into 1,000 pieces. A raw, guttural sob escaped his throat. "I am sorry," he stammered, his voice thick with tears and pain. I shouldn't have touched him. I was wrong." "Louder!" Jason's command roared through the diner, so powerful that it made people flinch. The demand broke the last dam of Miller's pathetic pride. He inhaled a ragged, shuddering breath and screamed, the sound tearing from his throat, raw and animalistic. "I'm sorry. I humiliated him. I was wrong. I'll never do it again. I'm sorry." His scream dissolved into uncontrollable, racking sobs. The diner was plunged into an absolute, ringing silence. The sound of a broken man's weeping was the only thing that remained. Every person in that room, every customer, every employee would be haunted by that sound. They had witnessed not just a beating, but the complete dismantling of a bully. The arrogant cop had been reduced to his true form, a pathetic crying child. Satisfied that the lesson was permanently etched into Miller's soul, Jason released him. The officer slid down the wall, collapsing onto the floor in a heap of shame. Uniform torn, body bruised, spirit eviscerated. He curled into a fetal position amidst the shattered glass and debris, his sobs the only evidence he was still conscious. Then, the transformation in Jason was immediate and astounding. The cold fury vanished from his eyes, the tension drained from his shoulders. The relentless warrior receded, and the devoted son returned. He turned his back on the wreck of man on the floor and walked back to the table where his father sat, watching, his face pale, but his eyes clear. Jason knelt beside him, his large, powerful hand gently covering his father's trembling one. His voice, which had just commanded terror, was now incredibly soft. "Are you hurt, Dad?" Arthur shook his head, his own voice quivering but steady. He looked from his son to the sobbing form of Miller and back again. "Not anymore," he said, a faint, sad smile touching his lips. "Not with you here." Jason's stoic expression softened. He leaned in and pressed a gentle kiss to his father's forehead, a gesture of profound love and protection that seemed almost out of place amidst the chaos. "He won't touch you again," he promised quietly, "or anyone else. Not for a long time." From the floor, Miller let out a low groan, clutching his ribs. The glint of his badge in the dim diner light was no longer a symbol of power, but a mark of disgrace. The waitress, Brenda, finally let out a shaky breath she seemed to have been holding for an eternity. "Mr. Statham," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. I think you just saved this whole town a lot of future trouble." Jason stood tall again, a shadow of righteous anger still clinging to him. He cast one last, cold look at Miller. His final words were not a threat, but a curse, a promise that would live in the officer's nightmares forever. "Anytime you think about putting your hands on an innocent person," he said, his voice sharp and final, "you remember this diner. You remember my father's face. And you remember me." With that, he gently helped his father to his feet. As they turned to leave, the crowd of diners parted silently, instinctively, creating a clear path to the door. It was a gesture of deep, unspoken respect. They walked out of the Iron Skillet Diner, the bell over the door jingling softly behind them, leaving behind a scene of wreckage, a broken man, and a story that would become a local legend. A stark reminder of what happens when a bully pushes a good man too far. What happened in the Iron Skillet Diner that morning was more than just a son defending his father. It was a raw, unfiltered lesson in the true nature of strength. It serves as a powerful reminder that real power isn't found in a badge, a uniform, or the ability to intimidate. True strength is measured by the courage to stand up for the vulnerable and to defend dignity at all costs. Have you ever witnessed someone abusing their authority and wish you could do something about it? What would you have thought if you were sitting in that diner, watching it all unfold? We often talk about justice, But do you think there are moments when a good person is forced to deliver that justice with their own hands? And what do you think separates true authority from simple, brutal tyranny? Let us know your thoughts below. If this story about justice and protecting the ones you love resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about everyday heroes pushed to their limits. Share this with someone who believes that standing up to bullies is always the right thing to do. We read every single one of your comments and value your perspective on these tough situations. More incredible stories about unexpected heroes are waiting for you on your screen right now. Click on one of those to watch next. And we'll see you tomorrow with a brand new story about a quiet librarian who outsmarted a team of corporate raiders. You won't want to miss it.